Welcome to the Kidlit Festival here at the Billings Public Library. I'm Precious Mackenzie from Rocky Mountain College, and I'm the moderator for this session. And today we have Janet Fox with us. Welcome, Janet. Thank you for being here. First, let me thank our sponsors, the Billings Public Library, Rocky Mountain College, the Writer's Voice, this House of Books, and Humanities Montana. Thank you so much for your support. Um, we have books for sale on the table, so please visit our book sale table before you leave today. And we have chances for door prizes, so make sure you get your raffle tickets. Um, and also, we have a chance to win a very large stuffed dog and a bag of books. So fill out the gold form, and you'll get a chance to win that too. Okay? Anything else? All right. Okay, Janet Fox writes award-winning fiction and nonfiction for children of all ages. Her published works include Get Organized Without Losing It. I love that title. And YA novels Faithful, Forgiven, and Sirens from Penguin. Also, The Charmed Children of Rookskill Castle from Viking. And her middle grade debut received star reviews from Kirkus, Booklist, Publishers Weekly, and Shelf Awareness is on numerous lists. And she's received SCBWI's Crystal Kite Award. Janet Fox, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Precious, and everybody for being here. I'm pleased to see you guys today. As Precious said, and thanks to all your sponsors for sponsoring this festival. I think it's really important for Billings to have a book festival for kids. So, as Precious said, I am an author, and I'm going to right away say I apologize for any technology glitches. I'm using my phone for the first time as a remote, so if I speed by something, I'll try to get back to it. I'm the author of a bunch of books, including 3 young adult novels, 4 young adult novels, 3 middle grade novels, 2 picture books, and 1 nonfiction middle grade book. So I've been around the block a few times, and I would love to have you guys ask any questions about the industry, about writing, because I'm hoping to show you what I do and how I come to do it. But first, I'd like to ask you, when you see these words, once upon a time, what's the feeling that you get? What do you think of? Anybody? Say again?
Tales.
Fairy tales. Fairy tales. What else? Anything else? What's the sensation that you have?
Somewhere else.
Somewhere else.
Anticipation.
Anticipation. Anybody else? Being in another time and place. How about even like relaxing, suddenly being transported? Yeah, I think all of those are exactly how we feel. And that's what story does. It transports us. It takes you to another time and place. It takes you to a fairy tale realm. And I really believe that story is everything. Because since our ancestors began telling stories around the campfire, that's how we relate to one another. That's how we connect with one another. That's how we meld our minds as a group. That's how we become who we are. The best stories will transport us, but they will also give us examples of how to live, how to respond, how to react, how to act in certain situations. And I'm a real believer that story is the basis for everything. Even when you hear someone on the street talking about what they did yesterday, the better they are at telling that story, the more you want to listen to them. And it's how we learn from one another. So I want to take you inside what it means to make a story, what it means for me to make a story, but in particular with middle grade books, because that's where I feel most attuned, or even though I have written for all ages, I really feel like the middle grade me is where I'm most happy. So I'm going to talk about how I find the stories that I write and then how I actually write them, how I revise them, because writing them, especially in that first draft, is only the very beginning. How stories get from me to you, and what middle grade stories really are, what I think that they can do for everyone, for the world. I love questions, and so keep your questions in mind, because that's my favorite part of any discussion is a Q&A. So how do I find ideas? Well, stories are everywhere. They're in the news, obviously. They're in our interpersonal relations. They're who we are. They're who we relate to. They're the things that we hear on the street. They're the things we hear from our friends and family. And we begin to collect them when we're young, and we keep collecting them through time. And that's why I think fairy tales in particular are such an appealing thing, because most of when we're young, we read fairy tales and we absorb fairy tales. I read myths and legends as a kid. That was my favorite genre to read, in addition to fairy tales. And as we collect those stories, we collect a template for story that becomes a part of our psyche, that becomes sort of a template for how we see life, as we see life in sort of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So for me, this was my favorite story when I was probably about your age. How old are you? 9. Just almost exactly. So that's me with the arrow at the tip of the arrow there in 3rd grade. And that's my very favorite teacher, Mrs. Weber. And the reason she was my favorite teacher is that she had us all write poetry. And I didn't know it, but she sent my poem into the town newspaper, and they published it. And I came home from school one day, and my mom had the paper spread out on the kitchen counter. And she said, look, your poem is in the newspaper. And that's the instant I knew at that age that I wanted to be a writer, that I wanted to see my name in print again. And this was the book that I was reading at that time. Have you guys read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or seen the movie? So it was my very favorite book, and the reason it was my very favorite book was it's about kids who are on their own, solving big problems, really big problems actually, in a magical land with talking animals and giants and dwarves and elves and all sorts of other creatures, talking trees, everything. It was a fantasy world that I absolutely loved. And I loved those kids, and I love what they went through. And this is actually the cover of the book that my mom gave me when I was little. And I still have all those books, the whole set, because I love them so much. And I love them so much that I not only wanted to read more books like that, but I wanted to write more books like that. I wanted to live in that space, both in terms of feeling the way I felt when I read them, but also feeling that way as I was writing. So that's what I chose to do when I wrote this book. And I'd already written for young adults, and I found it very satisfying, so I was cutting my teeth in the young adult market. But it wasn't quite grabbing me the way that the Narnia books had, and the way that this book, writing this book, did. This book came to be, and maybe I'll turn off this light if I can. Is there some way to turn off like just those lights in the front? Great. So this book came to be when I saw this image actually on Facebook, online. And it just struck me. I don't know why, but it just reached out to me. And as the further I explored, first of all, I wanted to know what the heck it was. Well, it's something called a chatelaine. And a chatelaine was originally a set of keys worn by the keeper of the chateau and worn at the waist. And if you've seen Downton Abbey, then you saw Mrs. Hughes wore the set of keys at her waist. Well, that was in the 18th, 17th century. This is an 18th to 19th century chatelaine, and it had begun to evolve into a charm bracelet-like thing, not a set of keys any longer, but something that was decorative. But as I looked at it, I thought, who would wear that? First of all, the number 13, which is, as we all know, has some magical connotations. And then there are some very strange charms on this chatelaine. There's a boy there who is clearly has a hunched back, and that's kind of a strange thing to wear as a charm. And then there's the number 13, and then there's the hands gesture that in Europe is used to ward off evil. And I thought, this is a very strange thing. What does it mean? And so I took the word charm and turned it into its adverb form, and as a person who is charmed, and turned it into a book in the story of kids in a castle in Scotland. And I went to Scotland and did some research, and I tried to give it that Narnia-type feel of children in trouble. And so how did I do that? Well, I took the image of the chatelaine and that spooky castle, and I decided to set it in World War II, during World War II, because the Narnia books were set during World War II. And also World War II has so much stuff going on, and I could play with all of the spy stuff and enigma machines and the things that were going on in the war. But I also wanted to make it a spooky, scary story. It just had that element to me with that chatelaine. So I added an antagonist that is made of pieces, and I won't tell you anymore, so I won't spoil it for you. That's the enigma machine, which, if you don't know, an enigma machine was something that the Germans used as a code machine. And my kids in this spooky castle find an enigma machine, and then they try to solve the code, because, of course, kids would do that. And the other aspect to it was I wanted to get those kids out of the adult realm the way that the Narnia books did, but instead of sending them to a different land, I used the Blitz, which took place in the beginning of World War II, when the Germans were bombing London, and a lot of parents actually did send their kids away from London to get them out of the horror of the Blitz. And many were sent to Scotland. Some were even sent to the United States, and in fact, I've met people who've told me that their parents or their grandparents came to the United States during the Blitz and then never left, and so they're now Americans. So it was a common thing. So I sent my kids off to this spooky castle in Scotland where they had adventures and solved problems and solved puzzles and riddles, and met up with a very creepy monster. And that was my first drift into what I thought of as my Narnia book. So stories are not just, I don't just write fantasy, because I also feel that it's important to write a story that will make a difference, that will change someone's mind about something, that will have an impact, that will have people think and feel and relate to other people in a different way. So this book is my most recent book, and it's quite different. It's not spooky, it's not a fantasy, it's not a Narnia-type book. It's a contemporary book. It's set in Montana. Two sisters who are living in a car with their dad. And on the first page this happens, so it's no surprise that they wake up in their car in the morning and they're alone. Their dad is missing. And the older sister has to take care of her younger sister and figure out how to do that, how to survive, how to try and find their father, and who to talk to. And she doesn't know who to talk to because she's scared and she's confused. And they're in a new place, and they're in Montana, and they are not native Montanans, so they don't know about the weather, and they don't know where they can go. And what helps to see them through is the kindness of the community around them, the compassion of the people that they meet. And I just want to say, as a kudo to librarians, that the hero in this story, in my view, is the librarian. Oops, wrong way. Here we go. And as you probably know, and you may have seen right outside the library, that there are a lot of homeless people here in Montana, including children. And so I felt it was really important to try and tackle this difficult subject with compassion, but also with an element of hope, because especially writing for middle grade readers, you always want to leave a feeling of hope for the reader who's in tackling especially difficult topics. So again, Carry Me Home, set in Montana, and in fact, it's set in a fictionalized Livingston. So if you know Livingston, you can sort of relate to it, about these two sisters living in the car. So my approach to writing the initial draft is to create characters who feel real. I spend a lot of time working on my characters. I want to create a story, obviously, that holds your interest. I want to create a world that feels real, and I want to create language that flows. So I do this by, I read a lot of books about writing. I study a lot of ideas about how our brains interact as readers and writers. I look at how a world can be built, whether it's a fantasy or science fiction world, or even a contemporary world like Carry Me Home. And I look at how we use human emotions, not just how we feel, but how we express how we feel, because that's what I want to bring alive on the page. I want to make sure that my readers feel that way, and they feel that way if they see things, and if I show them how someone is feeling as opposed to telling them how someone is feeling. Well, revision is where all the real work happens, so I write the first draft, trying to grab all of those emotions, trying to grab all of those characters, the setting, the language, the ideas that I'm trying to express. But revision is where it really comes together. And I've just recently sort of analyzed how long it takes me to write a book. Well, The Charmed Children of Rookskill Castle, I went through 60 drafts. 60, yeah. And I probably wrote those 60 drafts, well, I wrote those 60 drafts over 3 years, but I probably, in the first 3 months of writing, I probably wrote a third of those drafts. And each revision comes closer to final, but it's a slow process sometimes. Carry Me Home took a lot less time. Carry Me Home was a book that I wrote very quickly. I actually wrote it in 1 month. That was a record. But, big but, I had been thinking about the issue and the topic and the characters for 5 years. I hadn't written them. I had just let them stew because I wanted to get this story right, because it's a story that I wanted it to be true. This is some of the stuff I do in revision. Every book is different. People sometimes say, "What's your process?" And that means, how do you do this? And I just have to say that every time it's a little different. Every time I approach a new book, I do something a little different. The line of papers you see on the floor there, that's The Charmed Children of Rookskill Castle, all broken down because it was a very complicated book. Fantasy tends to be more complicated to write, for me anyway. And I had to really break it down and understand how every piece of the puzzle went together. And this was a physical way for me to do that. I also look at the structure of a story. So when the lines are going up, that means that I'm getting more tension, that more exciting things are happening. I want to be sure they're happening in the right place and what is happening in that place. And I just make notes to myself. I have a big whiteboard, and I just throw things on the wall, so to speak. I just think about, well, what could happen here? What could that be? How could I make that happen? So a breakdown of the characters. So the next step, of course, after writing and revising, is how to get my books into your hands, how to be published. I am traditionally published for the most part. I have one self-published book out, but when I started, traditional publishing was really the only good option. There wasn't much self-publishing, so I had to find an agent to represent me, and she did everything. She took care of the contracts, she sent the story to publishers, she found the right publishers, and then the publisher, when they buy the rights and publish the book, then the author, after signing the contract, gets what's known as an advance. It's an advance on royalties. So it's like money, but it's not free money. Because after the book is published, the author gets no more money until a certain number of copies are sold. And only then, when the advanced is what they call earned out, only then does the author get any more money from the publisher. Self-publishing is very different, of course, and it's becoming much more popular, and it's a whole new realm. But you can put a book up on Amazon in about 5 minutes now. I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend getting it edited and taking time and finding a good cover to show off your book. But those are the ways that books come to be. So, what is magic in middle grade books? What do I think of as magic in middle grade? Well, I really feel about that connection is the most important thing. Connecting with the middle grade reader, with the kid who's going to read my book, with the audience. And so I try to bring an interesting idea, an exciting idea. I try to present it in an exciting way, an interesting way, so that you'll be entertained and enjoy it. And this is something else that I do. This is the book I'm working on right now that I'm about to send to my agent. And I've been working on this book for 10 years. So it's gone through a lot of different iterations, a lot of revisions. Yes?
In one of your back,
Go ahead.
in one of your backgrounds in the page, when you set out all those papers, do you own a library?
Do I own? No, that's just my bookshelf. I buy a lot of books. I have a lot of books, don't I? Yeah, I'll go back and I'll show you that again if you want. But this is a book that I'm working on right now. It's another middle grade fantasy, and but it's a set in an alternate Elizabethan England, not the real one, but my own imagination of one. And it incorporates magic. You can see that there's a dragon. I love dragons. Go. So the best stories, it doesn't matter whether they're middle grade or not, the best stories make us feel, give us an emotional connection with the audience, with the reader, with each other, with the people around us now. When you put down a book and you say, wow, that I was transported, as you all said at the beginning, it took me to a different place. That's what I hope to bring to the page. And I also want to make readers think. This is a picture from World War II, from Holland, and I'm sure you can feel the emotion in that picture and what was going on in that picture. But I would like to make my readers think about what people can and should do in certain circumstances. That's another goal of mine. And we connect, as we have ever since we began painting on cave walls with one another. The mammoth that Moog brought home for his family to eat, he has to tell the story about how he killed that mammoth so that the next time somebody goes out hunting mammoth, they'll be able to do it. They'll be able to bring home the mammoth meat for the family. So we connect through stories, we make magic through stories. this is my goal and my dream, and hopefully that is your goal as well. If you're writers and if you're readers, you're connecting through the power of storytelling. So, questions? And also, I'm going to invite Susan to come up and join me, because Susan Adrian is our other author here tonight.
And also answer questions.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So,
Do you want to tell them about your books too?
oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well,
Yes.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
It's interesting that we wandered in here today because I actually do homeless outreach.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I primarily work with adults who struggle with mental health
yeah.
issues. But yes, children.
You
and,
do
Yes.
blessed work.
Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
very important work.
So have you worked with any nonprofits who to
Very generally.
to just educate about the difficulty with
Yeah, just very generally. I mean, with COVID, it's been difficult. This book came out last summer, so it's been a kind of a hard haul. But my goal this coming year, I have some connections with Rotary, and I'm from Bozeman, and I want to talk to Rotary and other organizations in and around Bozeman, because we do have a big homeless population there as well. And I think, I mean, my book is fiction, but hopefully it speaks to the issue, which is like a serious and growing problem, as you know. Yeah, you deal with. Yeah, good for you.
Well, I'm glad that we're here because he is this summer going to be working on writing.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. Yeah. You have a question.
What's the arc about?
Oh, ARC is science fiction. That's a young adult book. Yeah, you'll have to wait a couple of years for that one.
I just wanted to say, Susan Adrian, I live in Butte, and I have 4 books published, 2 for young adult and 2 middle grade that are both very magical indeed. So I relate to exactly what Janet was talking about. So yeah, Forever Neverland is my most recent, and Nutcracked before that. Yeah, young adult books.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yay.
This one is a spin-off of Peter Pan. So it's about an autistic boy and his 1 year older, very bossy sister who end up going. They find out that they're descendants of Wendy from Peter Pan, and he takes them. And so it's a really fun book, but it's also interesting because one of the main characters is autistic, and so it's from his point of view also. And I did a lot of work to make sure that was right. But I think it's important. We were talking before about that homelessness is represented in a positive way, that autism is represented in a positive way, that kids can see themselves, and the magic is fun and very important too. But I think some of those issues are also important.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Writers can ask questions.
Yes, writers can ask questions too.
How do you keep all of your ideas organized? Or are they organized?
Are they organized? Well, I did write a book about organization. That was my first book, and I wrote it because my son is on the spectrum, and he needed it, and so I had all this information that I had gathered, and I just put it together, and that I sold myself before I got an agent. How do I keep organized? I don't really try to organize in a rigorous way. I actually like to work on multiple things at once. I'm working on that fantasy that's the alternate Elizabethan fantasy, but at the same time I'm co-authoring a book about Rosalind Franklin, who really should have won the Nobel Prize for discovering the structure of DNA. And so that's a co-authored book, so that's a very different process. And I've got a picture book coming out, and an idea for a YA, and another idea for another.
And on the theme that everyone does everything completely differently
Yeah.
in the writer's world and different for each book, I have tried writing several things at the same time and it doesn't really work for me. So I tend to write one thing. I mean, yes, I'll often be doing revisions of something else with an editor, but when I'm doing first draft, I do much better if I'm just doing one and I can stay in it. And I also don't have a lot of writing time because I have a full-time day job. So I write for about an hour a day and don't have time to do more than one.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a really important, actually, a really important comment that writing is very individual, and I'm having this discussion right now with a group of people. I'm also a book coach, which means that I take on writers who want help with their books and help them get through it. And one of my friends has a client who insists that she's going to write a book and she's going to get it done in a certain amount of time, and that's the only way to do it. And we're trying to convince her that there is no one right way. Everything.
And every book is different.
Every book is different.
Just
And
come
every
up and
book-
try to do the same thing you did from before,
And
and
it
it just doesn't work.
no, so it's very individual. So I don't put yourself in a box. Just yeah.
If you feel you need to be hyper organized about it, I know
Yeah.
people that do that.
Yes. And organization also comes in various forms. A lot of people, people in the writing community generally classify themselves as either pantsers or plotters. Yeah, I'm actually a pantser who's leaning a little more into plotting, but that's only because I need to be able to organize a little bit. But pantsing means you just write, and you write from your imagination
From the
without
seat of your pants.
any forward planning. And of course, plotters then plan everything out the way we did in high school, which I can't do that. So
I tend to try, as I write more, the more books I write, the more that I plot more carefully in revision, but I still just can't quite do it in first draft. I just start with like a character in a situation, and I just kind of go and I see what happens, and then I get to a point where I am with the book I'm writing right now. I'm like 13,000 words in, and I'm like, it's not working. I'm not really sure. Something clearly is wrong, and I can tell when something's wrong, and I have to stop and I have to figure out. I need to add another element because there's not enough going on here. The character is not quite fleshed out enough. I need to work on that. So that's where I am right now. But it always happens because that's how I write. If I plotted in advance, maybe I'd spend all that time ahead of time. I've tried. It just doesn't work.
yeah, then you have to do what works.
Yeah.
What works for you. So, any other questions?
How much research on, well, I guess it would just really vary depending on your topic.
Absolutely. How much research? Yeah, it does. It completely varies according to topic. But you have to build a world, whether you're building that world in a fantasy realm or you're building a world like in Carry Me Home, which is a real world. So you do have to have you do have to do research. It doesn't matter. I had to do research on homelessness, for example, and that's why it took me 5 years to kind of figure this out. Because obviously I am lucky. I'm not homeless, and so this is not my personal experience. It's an experience that I had to understand in order to be able to portray it. It's always different. It's always a little different. I mean, writing the science fiction book, you asked about art. The science fiction book, it's set on the moon. Well, I've never been to the moon. I don't think I'm going to be going to the moon. Maybe you will, but I'm not. So I had to do research to figure out what it was like to possibly have a habitat on the moon, what that would have been like.
Honestly, some people love research.
Yeah,
There are some people who like the research more than the writing, and you can kind of tell those people
Yeah.
when they spend like years and years and years and years researching and they never actually write the book. I kind of dive in and I stop when I come to something, and sometimes I make a note that I'm going to go back and find this out. Sometimes I have to do it right then, but I'm still in the first draft, like doing research as I go thing.
That's what happened with this book about Rosalind Franklin. I have done almost none of the research for this book. My co-author came to me because she's been spending the last 10 years researching and she just couldn't bring the story together. Again, going back to the idea of story and the connections. You don't make the connection with Rosalind Franklin through the work that she did. That's genius. That's incredible. And she did incredible work that isn't well known. And she was living in a time when women generally weren't awarded for the work that they were doing, and she was one of them. But what's important to me now as a writer is that I try to bring her to life on the page, so that the reader who is reading about Rosalind Franklin is saying, wow, she's such an interesting person. I want to know more about her, making the connection with her emotionally. So that it's, that's.
And you can tell in a book that just has.
It just
Just
has
research.
research. Yeah, you can tell when you're reading a book and you get bored, right? Because if there's too much just information and there's not a story, you still have to have tension, you still have to have characters, you still have to have all of that to make it a story. It doesn't matter whether it's about the moon, it could be a really interesting topic, but the book could be not yours. The book could be really boring if you don't know how to
my
make the character.
thesis, my master's thesis.
Oh yeah, theses are allowed to be boring.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
okay. Yeah.
No, I just got stuck. It was just like top heavy on all my research. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to actually
It's hard.
take all that and synthesize it and put it into something.
Yeah.
Yeah, my first book was the hardest one, and it never sold or anything like that. But my very first book that I decided to try writing, I wrote a book based in medieval England, 1387. It's like it's based on Chaucer and all this stuff. So I have like still piles of medieval books that I read about history and costumes or clothing and what they ate and what they did, everything. I'm sure that's a lot for your one you're working on now, the Elizabethan one. It's hard when even the words, you're like, would they have used that word? They wouldn't have used that word. I have to do a cognate of.
This is a fantasy in
Oh,
an
there you go.
universe.
Yeah. Anyway, that was the hardest one, so I got that out of the way, and then from then on, it's not as hard. Other question?
So the Artifact Hunters is actually a sequel to the Charmed Children of Rookskill Castle. So it takes place a couple years later, still in World War II. So they're still in the war, and it's still in the same castle, but it's some slightly different kids. A boy arrives on the scene because he's fleeing Nazi, what was then Czechoslovakia, is now the Czech Republic, and so he gets there and he has to deal with a lot of creepy things too. But I won't spoil it for you. And I'm thinking of writing a third one in that series, by the way. Oh, that's the book. That's the first book I wrote. It's all about, for your age actually, or a little bit older, when you're in school and you can't pull it together, when you have trouble. So it's got a lot of funny ways of thinking of being organized.
How would you stimulate the mind of a 9-year-old to
How would I
write?
How would I get into the mind of?
Stimulate the mind of stimulate. Yeah.
Oh, to be a reader or?
To write.
Oh, to write.
You know the number one recommendation for writing?
Reading. And reading anything. I'm a big believer, firm believer that kids should read what they want to read.
Exactly.
They should, within their age range. But if a kid wants to read graphic novels, go for it.
Goosebumps or whatever the
Or
equivalent is
Goosebumps,
right now,
or Captain Underpants. It doesn't matter. Reading is
I read
just.
Sweet Valley High.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Whatever. Yes.
I like Captain America.
Awesome. and it's reading. It's reading. My son is dyslexic, and so getting him to read when he was a kid was difficult. And graphic novels were not a thing when he was young. So and now he's a writer. I just want to say. and about to have his first book come out, so I'm very proud of him. But I just believe in anything.
Absolutely. But the other thing I was going to say too, and being writers and readers, we're going to say the books are the best way. I do think also that movies are telling stories. You know, TV shows, if they're done well, are telling stories. So you see story everywhere. It's just a matter of paying attention to it. And the fact that, you know, I get ideas from watching TV shows and movies because it's still, they have wonderful arcs of the plot to figure out, you know, how they do that and how it's effective. But there's still characters, there's still stuff. So reading, yes, number one, but also just kind of looking at stories around you and watching things too.
And just ask, what if? What if something like this happened? What if? And you know, I liked the Narnia books when I was your age. And so now I'm writing books that are similar to the Narnia books. Maybe you'll write the next Captain Underpants. And that would be awesome. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you so much.